The revolution is real, it's live, and as some comrades say, it's lit, right? lit. Real, live, lit. Right? The revolution is lit.
Uhuru comrades, and welcome to today's Omali Taught Me Sunday Study, live with the leader of the African nation, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. My name is Yejide Oromila, and I am the president of the African National Women's Organization, which is under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. Our usual host, Director Akile Enai, is representing our party at the 44th National Black United Front Convention in Pennsylvania, but I will serve as your MC for this morning. So do not adjust your programming. You're in the right place. Last week, we discussed the rebellions in France as part of a special episode raising funds to support Black Power 96 Radio, where Omali Taught Me is aired. This week, we return to our history of anti-colonial revolution series, extending the discussion on the Russian Revolution through the eyes of the African internationalism. To provide us with a historical overview, we'll have Jesse Neville, chair of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, and one of the Uhuru Three indicted by the U.S. government, along with Penny Hess and Chairman Omali Yeshitela. Following, we'll go through our announcements before inviting Chairman Omali Yeshitela to deepen this discussion. Then we'll take some time to answer questions from the audience. Before we start, make sure to share the study far and wide. Take a moment right now to like this video, tag your friends, subscribe to our YouTube and Chairman Omali's Twitch channels. Also, throughout the study, we'd like for you to bring any donations that you want to uhurutours.com/donate. And donating to Uhuru Tours today will help to bring the electrifying presentations of Chairman Omali Yeshitela to the Northeast U.S. this fall. Again, that's uhurutours.com/donate. Now, let's welcome our chair, Jesse Neville, to the program. Uhuru, Jesse.
Uhuru, thank you, President Yejide Oromila. Very, very honored to be participating in this study today. And I just want to, reintroduce that my name is Jesse Neville, and I have the honor to be a member of the African People's Solidarity Committee, the organization of white people formed by and led by the African People's Socialist Party, with the responsibility to go into the white community and organize white people like ourselves to stand in solidarity with the African Revolution and fight for reparations to African people. And I'm very honored to have been assigned to continue with the presentation of this study here on Omali Taught Me on the Russian Revolution through the eyes of African internationalism. And I want to start by acknowledging this incredible political education program, Omali Taught Me, which is conducted by the Department of Agitation and Propaganda every single Sunday under the leadership of Director Akile Anai. So I want to say uhuru and revolutionary salute to Director Akile, as well as to President Yejide, the president of the African National Women's Organization, and to Chairman Omali Yeshitela, the founder and leader of this movement, the theoretician of the theory of African internationalism. And as the name of this study says, Omali taught me, the entirety of what I will be presenting today is what I have learned with having had the incredible opportunity to be under the leadership of Chairman Omali Yeshitela and using the theory of African internationalism to understand the world. And this presentation, I mean that generally, but also specifically, this presentation was formed and developed under the direct leadership of Chairman Omali Yeshitela. And these are the teachings of the chairman and of African internationalism, which help us to see the Russian Revolution, as it says in the title, through the eyes of African internationalism. And to see the Russian Revolution through the eyes of African internationalism is to see the whole world. To see anything through the eyes of African internationalism is to see it in its interconnectedness with everything else in the world in the context of the struggle of African people to overturn colonialism. And I also want to begin by acknowledging the people in this room, particularly in addition to Chairman Omali, we have Deputy Chair Onezene Yeshitela, the Deputy Chair of the African People's Socialist Party, who is here, and under whose leadership we have the honor to work in the Solidarity Committee. I also want to acknowledge the Chairwoman of the African People's Solidarity Committee, Penny Hess, and all of the comrades who are tuning in, who are here in person and who are tuning in online for this important session today. So to jump into this study and just really look forward to the chairman coming on and deepening all of this as we go forward. But as I stated, we are continuing to look at the Russian Revolution through the eyes of African internationalism. And for anyone who did not get to see the previous installment of this series on the Russian Revolution, I encourage you to go back and watch that. It was held a little over a month ago. But I will also be kind of recapping some of the main things that we talked about in the first installment of this study. Next slide. And this study is looking at the Russian Revolution using the political theory of African internationalism created by Chairman Omali Yeshitela. And as it is explained in the party's organizational manual, the African People's Socialist Party has developed a political theory that understands the world through the eyes of the African working class and explains the place and future of African people in it. This is the theory of African internationalism. So in the previous study on the Russian Revolution, we looked at the events that led to the seizure of power by the Bolshevik Party, which was the socialist vanguard party led by V.I. Lenin, that overturned the 300-year-old Romanov dynasty under the control of what was known as the Tsar. But we looked at these events using the analysis, Chairman Omali Yeshitela's analysis of the colonial mode of production, which more so than just the events that took place in Russia, truly explains the basis for why the Russian Revolution happened at the time that it did and in the way that it did. And key to this understanding is the concept and understanding that Chairman Omali Yeshitela has put forward, that colonialism is the mode of production, that colonialism is not a policy, but a mode of production that, as the chairman says, has tied the whole world together into a single economy, with its foundation being the parasitic relationship between colonizer, oppressor nations and colonized, oppressed nations. And under this colonial mode of production, all value, goods, services, life itself is produced for the colonizer, for white people, Europeans, through the oppression, exploitation, violence, coercion, theft of resources, extraction of wealth from the colonized. And this is the basis for the global capitalist economy, what's become to be referred to as the capitalist economy, that was built on the enslavement and colonization of African people. So in the previous study, we looked at what became known as the February Revolution in 1917, where after years of fierce struggle by workers and peasants, the Tsar, who was basically like the emperor or king, Nicholas II, was ousted, and their regime was replaced by a provisional government, which was comprised of constitutional Democrats or cadets, liberals, petty bourgeois forces, and there were socialists and even some Bolsheviks who were in the provisional government, but it was under the control basically of middle-class liberal forces. And that came to an end in October of 1917 during the October Revolution, where the Bolsheviks, which again was the Socialist Workers' Party led by Lenin, overthrew the provisional government and declared all power to the Soviets. But again, only the political theory of African internationalism, developed by Chairman Omali Yeshitela, reveals the true historical basis for the Russian Revolution, which was anti-colonial struggle by colonized peoples taking place at that time in the world. And specifically, the period in which the Russian Revolution takes place is during the time frame known as World War I, or what the chairman has correctly characterized as the First Imperialist World War, where war broke out between the major colonial imperialist powers in the world to redivide the world. That's what, as the chairman has said, every major war, every war that Europe and the US have been involved in has been a war to redivide the world, to redivide amongst themselves who controls what conquered and colonized territories and peoples. And what necessitated this warfare, what made it necessary, if you will, for the imperialist powers to end their usual forms of peaceful negotiation over who gets to control what territory, was struggles by colonized people, the struggles of African people, the movement of Marcus Garvey, which was achieving its huge influence and growth during that time period, the struggles in Nicaragua, the Mexican Revolution, the anti-colonial struggles of people in India, and so much more. And we talked about this in the previous study. These were the conditions, as the chairman has explained, happening in the world at that time that created this uneasy situation and this tumultuous situation in which the conditions became ripe for the Russian Revolution to happen in the way that it did. And key to this was that, as the chairman has explained to us, during this time, Russia was involved, before the Bolsheviks came to power, Russia was involved in the First Imperialist World War. Their military was involved, their troops were engaged in battle, and all of the major European political establishment at that time was being involved in the First Imperialist World War. And even most European socialists and Russian socialists were in favor of Russia's participation in the First Imperialist World War. They had a position that was referred to as the defensist position, where they believed it was the responsibility even of communists in Russia to support Russia's involvement in the war in the name of, quote, defending the fatherland. But Lenin's position was quite different. Lenin, as the chairman explains, believed that it was the responsibility of communists and revolutionaries in every country to turn imperialist war into civil war. And that was his slogan, that when the imperialists create warfare, that is a situation that the revolutionaries should use to fight for revolution, not to become involved in a contest between the imperialists, but to turn it into a civil war that would make it possible for the working class to take power. And Lenin put forward a program for the Bolshevik Party, and on that program was the demand and the pledge that when the Bolsheviks came to power, they would take Russia out of the First Imperialist World War, because he said it was a contest between contending sectors of the international bourgeoisie or ruling class. And he believed that all communists should take that position and he was involved in struggles within the European communist movement, who by and large did not agree with his position and were in favor of continuing to be involved in that imperialist war. But again, Lenin pushed for pulling Russia out of this imperialist war. And what this means, the significance of this, which is lost on the vast majority of so-called historians who look at this, has been correctly summed up by Chairman Amalia Shatella as the fact that by doing this, by having this position that Russia should remove itself from this imperialist war and fight for a revolution instead, Lenin and the Bolsheviks objectively aligned themselves with the colonized peoples of the world and pushed for Russia to enter onto a trajectory that was separate from what the rest of Europe was involved in at that time. And that's an absolutely key understanding provided by Chairman Amalia Shatella and the theory of African internationalism that puts the Russian Revolution in context and finally clarifies and makes it make sense why the Russian Revolution came under attack from the very beginning by the world imperialist powers and the United States, that it was much deeper than just what we might hear about a contest between so-called the capitalist America and the socialist Russia or Soviet Russia, that it was all revolving around the colonial question. Uhuru Chairman. Chairman Amalia Shatella is going to join us at this time.
Yeah, this is a very important discussion. And I think that we have to recognize this is a very serious moment in history. A profound crisis has afflicted the existing social system, the existing social order. And it is within this context that we saw, first of all, the rise of Marxism and various other ideas that were being pursued to explain the world as it was moving, as Europe was moving from, or had moved from feudalism, and in the sense of Russia, it was something that had just begun, moving from feudalism or feudal mode of production. And anything was better for Europeans than what they were experiencing under feudalism. And so in every instance, philosophy serves the purpose of trying to explain the place and the history and the destiny of the people. And now that the economy of feudalism has been nearly destroyed, almost destroyed, capitalism clearly has not only been on the ascendancy, but a very destructive way as far as Europeans were concerned. There needs to be also a change in how the world is viewed. And if we know anything about political economy, we know that it's the basis, the economic base, you see a political economy that is defined by an economic base and the superstructure that stems from that economic base. How the ideas, what is it that explains the society itself? And if you see the economic base of the society, which up to now was described in Europe as feudal base of the society being wiped out, then there has to be new ideas. The fact is that up to this point, basic philosophical assumptions revolve around things like the divine role of kings and what have you, that somehow it was through kings and the nobility that God expressed his, and God was a man at this time anyway, God expressed his will. And so now you see the situation where this has changed. So how do you explain the world? And we see various philosophies emerging and to come up with ideas of explaining the world. And what the world, however, must be understood that these were Europeans in Europe. This is not some casual or some assault on the white man that I hear sometimes coming from nationalists that
this is the white man's philosophy, and therefore this and that. This is a description of actual reality in the world. And the world was, at this point, Europe was a starving, diseased, ridden, impoverished place on the planet Earth that was rescued by the assault by Portugal in the beginning, but all of Europe and the trade in black people, the assault on the indigenous peoples of the Americas, where that trade was extended, and the whole colonialism began to be the dominant thing. You can find evidence of this when you look at even how Karl Marx talks about how capitalism gets started. And you must remember this. Karl Marx talked about how capitalism gets started. And he's trying to solve a problem in Europe for Europeans. And this is not just some kind of empty chauvinistic stance that's coming from Marx. The world was defined in this fashion. The world that they knew was one they were escaping from feudalism, from the dominance of the kingdom, kings and things like this, and looking for freedom. And everybody wanted to be free. Everybody wanted, all people do, and have authority over their lives. And so how this authority was represented during this time was through the nobility, through kings and things like that. And if I'm not mistaken, I think Tsar may be derivative from Caesar. And that's who was the guy who was in charge in Russia. And he was there by blood, because he was born to rule, etc. And this is what had dominated the world. And so what happens, of course, is that in this process of explaining the world now, coming up with a new, and from their perspective, more concise and more necessary explanation of what the world is about, then you see Marx, you see various other forces who were anarchists and nihilists, and all these contending ideas about what society should look like. And so Marxism became a dominant explanation for that, and it spread not only, it became what was characterized as scientific socialism, because there were others who called themselves socialists before Marx, but their socialism was based on the goodwill of kings. Their socialism was based on superstition and all kinds of stuff like that. And so Marx said, "Hey, that doesn't work." And he was defined as a scientific socialist, but he took much of the ideas coming from prior socialists throughout Europe, or socialists who were in Europe, or people who were raising contention about how the world should look like in Europe, trying to explain the world. He took a lot of that from them, and his socialism was a reflection of turmoil and the kind of turbulence that we see happening in the world today, and Europeans expanding and fighting for who's going to get what, and how to define itself, the emergence of Europe itself. There was no Europe prior. This was recently after what came to be known as Europe. So I think it's really important to understand that. But I wanted to go further and just there's a guy whose name was Bertil Hessel, who wrote an introduction to something on the theses, resolutions, and manifestos having to do with the communist movement. I'm going to be too long. I'm going to really go through this rapidly because I want us to be able to complete this study that's being offered up. And he talks about the beginning of the world revolution and the proclamation of the Communist International. It's really important to understand this because Marx was not talking about a Russian revolution. He wasn't talking about a German. He was German. He wasn't talking about a German revolution. He said some things about France and what that should look like. He borrowed ideas from French economists and philosophers and stuff like that, as well as German economists and philosophers, and English, British economists and philosophers, and he came up with the scientific explanation of the world. But again, his objective is his moving from the perspective of solving the problems in Europe, and that took him throughout all of Europe. So that's what he is offering up, and he's talking about a world revolution that includes all of Europe. He was not just talking about a single state. And it's really important for us to understand that. So, which gives us some idea of why there was so much consternation when Lenin talked about taking power in Russia. And why the Bolsheviks themselves, because they were self-proclaimed Marxists, had to be able to justify taking power in Russia. And especially as Marx had predicted that revolution, which comes as a consequence of the resolution of contradictions inside a particular society, leaping to a higher level. And this is what revolution was. It was moving from one mode of production to another mode of production, and it thrust the people into this process. And he characterized this as the movement of the development of human society, not Russian society, not British, but human society. And you got to understand that they saw themselves as human society. They did not consider Africa. They did not consider all these other places in terms of how their philosophy, how their quote unquote science would articulate itself. The humans, except as auxiliaries to the development of human society, which ultimately was what they were talking about as European society. So here, this introduction to a book that I'm looking at, Theses, Resolutions, and Manifestos of the first 4 Congresses of the Third International. And there were these different internationals. The one that Marx and Engels and others participated in was considered the first international, first working men's association and things like that. And this is international. No Africans there, no Mexicans there, nobody from the colonial world there. These are white people. These are Europeans who objectively speaking, these are colonizers. Objectively, I'm not talking about there's a self-proclaimed recognition of being colonizers, even though we can go and see evidence in 1907 Stuttgart meeting of the World Communist Movement under the Second International, where the communist movement at that time, they did vote to support and promote socialist colonialism. So there was a recognition of being colonizers that was inherent to everything that they were doing among sectors of them. And I don't even know if all of them got that quite clearly, because they didn't know that what they were defining as society had grown greater than England, France, greater than Europe, because now the world was connected into a single economy as a consequence of slavery, as a consequence of black people being captured and then taken all around the world, as a consequence of Europe going into India and all of this. There's a whole new world that has been created, a world society. A society has emerged and through which Marx was able to eat. Marx was able, along with his friend Engels, to sit around in libraries and write these incredibly important and I believe significant kind of treatises. But they had the luxury to do that because somebody was picking cotton in the Caribbean that was feeding Engels' father and Engels, and that gave resources to Marx so he could spend time in the libraries and things like that all over Europe. So here we have Bertil Hessel. He writes, the beginning of the world revolution and the proclamation of the Communist International. In August 1914, the German Social Democratic Party, the main organization of the Second International, voted in the Reichstag for the war credits demanded by the government. So they voted. They're talking about the First Imperialist World War now. And so these communists voted to give taxes and what was necessary for the German war machine to pursue this war. These are socialists. These are at the time who were voting this, and say it is an attitude. Its attitude was shared by virtually all the major parties of the International. Almost all the communist parties in the International voted, did the same thing, breaking with the resolution of the 1907 Stuttgart Congress. We just referenced that, and the 1912 Basel Congress. The Second International thus abandoned its internationalist position, and most of its national sections took the side of their respective bourgeoisie. So most of these countries, they united with their own bourgeoisie to make this war. And this violated even principles that they had held up at some juncture. And I think it's important that this guy, Hessel, writes this, and he says they're breaking now. Even with the position that came up from the 1907 Stuttgart Congress. But the 1907 Stuttgart Congress is the one where they said they're going to have what? They're going to have socialist colonialism. They voted for that. So, but he characterizes this as violating their internationalist stance. Of course, you can be an internationalist, right? While uniting with all the white workers, et cetera, and all in their subjugation of the colonized peoples of the world. On the initiative of the Italian Socialist Party, which had not capitulated in this way, those who were against the chauvinist policy of the social democratic leaderships began to regroup at an international level. At their first conference, however, held in Zimmerwald in September 1915, the centrists won a majority for their opposition to a split and the creation of a third international. So this struggle came up about a splitting and creating another international because of what Lenin characterized as a yellow international, the second international, because of the policies that it took. It says at their first conference, however, held in Zimmerwald in September, the centrist majority won a majority for their opposition to a split and the creation of a third international. Only the left, most notably the Russian Bolsheviks and the future German and Dutch leftists, came out in favor of converting the imperialist war. Only the left, most notably the Russian Bolsheviks and the future German and Dutch leftists, came out in favor of converting the imperialist war into a worldwide civil war and thus creating a revolutionary international. Revolutionary international. None of the components of the international opposition, which met again in Keinthal in April 1916, would change its position during the course of the war. They still held that same position, supporting their own ruling class. The creation of the new international was not, in any case, to be decided by any conference. If we concern ourselves with the facts themselves rather than the juridical enactments, we have to recognize that the Third International was born in 1917 in Russia on the initiative of the Bolsheviks alone, when they set themselves the goal of leading a proletarian revolution in Russia. They were acting as the de facto leadership of the European revolutionary movement through the Russian Revolution. It was a Europe-wide seizure of power that was being initiated. You understand? So what they were seeing is this capture by the Bolsheviks as the process through which it was a European-wide seizure of power was initiated. So no one, even from among the Russian communists, doubted that the proletariat of the most developed capitalist countries, Germany, Britain, France, was the essential agent of socialist revolution in Europe. Therefore, in Russia itself, or that the Russian working class could provide any more than the initial impetus for the movement. Symptomatic of, in this respect, Lenin's April thesis not only contained that national dimensions to which most writers make exclusive reference, they also indissolubly linked the goal of the proletarian revolution in Russia to building of a new international. Within the Bolshevik Central Committee, the very date of the insurrection was discussed in relation to the international responsibilities of the Russian communists. And in the letters and articles in late September 1917, in which Lenin urged the leadership to prepare for immediate insurrection, the principal argument he used for the seizure of power were not specifically national, let us say not just Russian in character. Anyway, the whole life of the international communist movement would subsequently be marked by the success of the Russian Revolution, the very nature of which was not conceivable save in relation to the European revolution, proletarian and socialist in character, in which it was inserted. This is the fundamental point which enables us to understand the entire political evolution of the Communist International through the various twists and turns. Russia would become one of the conquests of the world proletariat, and that proletariat would henceforth have a dual task: to combine the offensive in countries where the bourgeoisie was still dominant with the defense and utilization of the position already captured through the victory of Soviet power in Russia. So anyway, that's all I wanted to share with you. I think it's really important to break through this narrow kind of understanding of what the Russian Revolution was, what gave birth to it, as Comrade Jesse was talking about, and why, and the significance of theory and philosophy, and what gives rise to theory and philosophy, and also why the African People's Social Party seems to be standing alone, trying to push for a revolution in 2023, and why the United States government has targeted us for attack. And they're doing so despite the fact they had to create, they had to manufacture charges because we're not even guilty of what they said that we are guilty of, despite the fact that we live under colonial domination, and it is the obligation of colonized people to break free from colonial domination. We didn't do what they said we did, and so they had to manufacture this thing. But this is where we are, and it's really important for us to try to deepen this understanding, because nobody's talking about this anymore today. The whole question of seizure of power is not even something that's being discussed. When Lenin came back to Russia after having been pushed out into exile because they were going to arrest him, because they didn't come to his house at 5 o'clock in the morning because he had bounced by that time. So they did intend to get him, and they were looking for him. They were going to put him in prison, and so he had to come back into the country in a very surreptitious way. He had come back in the country even with the assistance of Germany that wanted Russia to be out of that war, so that it could be successful in what this mission was. So Lenin had to sneak back into the country, and then the Germans provided him with a car. An empty car on a railroad that took him into Finland, which is now talking about becoming a part of NATO, into Finland, which is right there on the border of Russia. And when Lenin was greeted by all of these people in the middle of all the turmoil that was happening in Russia and the world, and there was debate about the so-called the Soviets that had been created inside Russia, and the people, the working people, were contending with the existing social order for power, and they had created these Soviets, these committees and stuff that was actually had a power that was able to contend with the power of the Tsar, contend with the power of Kerensky and the cadets, and he got off the train in Finland, Helsinki, and they were saying, "Well, what you got to say, Lenin? Tell us what it is." And Lenin made the statement that has become popular. In other words, said, "All power to the Soviets." As to go for the power to the Soviets, which has been translated, especially we hear that coming from the Black Panther Party. Many people don't know where it came from. Huey did, which is all power to the people, because that's where the people were organized in Soviets. And that's what we say today as we are moving forward, all power to the people, but black power to the African nation. So go ahead, Jesse. Thank you. Yeah. I just wanted to make that intervention. Good.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Let's give another round of applause for Chairman Omali Yeshitela. Thank you so much for that intervention, Chairman. That really deepened my understanding, and just really, really appreciate everything that you just laid out. And I got to make sure I can get back on here. Let me see.
I know you got to work with this tab.
Oh, no problem. It's more about this screensaver coming on. Okay. All right. So just need to, yeah. All right. Sorry. So yeah, I just really want to appreciate what the chairman just laid out, and just putting that in its international context, and even the point about, in the previous slide talking about turning imperialist war into civil war, but as it said in that piece that the chairman was just reading, turning it into worldwide civil war, and that it was part of putting it in the world revolutionary struggle. So just really appreciate the chairman laying that out. So where we were in this these slides, I think we're back up now. Okay, so we can go to slide 11. Okay. So we're looking at, and I'm going to try to go through this quickly, but we're looking at the fact that in the immediate aftermath of the Russian Revolution, the world imperialist powers were immediately involved in attack on the Russian Revolution and attempting to undermine it and destroy it. And this is just a really quick summary of that doesn't go into any kind of detail. But Chairman Omali Yeshitela has stated from the beginning of this most recent escalation of war with the United States and NATO and the proxy war using the people of Ukraine as cannon fodder in this struggle against Russia. The chairman has pointed out that this war began over 100 years ago with the attack on the Russian Revolution. And the fact of the matter is that almost immediately after the Russian Revolution in 1917, Russia was under assault by an invasion of imperialist powers and their proxy forces who were known as the White Russians. And it was a struggle between the Red Army and the White Army, the White Russians. And 8 million Russians died between 1918 and 1921 in this struggle to push back against this counter-revolution that was happening, which was backed by, the White Russians were backed by 15 imperialist powers who were either behind them or directly involved in invading Russia at that time, which included the United States, the UK, Canada, Australia, the colonial regime of South Africa, France, Italy, and Japan all came down upon Russia. And then during the Second Imperialist War, or what is referred to in bourgeois historians refer to as World War II, just to say quickly about this, that, I'm sure personally growing up, I heard all these myths, lies that in World War II, the United States went in and liberated the concentration camps and defeated the Nazis. And it was the great American liberators who marched in to Auschwitz and all these other places. And the fact of the matter is actually that the United States was more interested in sitting back and doing nothing and watching the Soviets go up against the Nazis. And they were hoping that would weaken the Soviet Union. They were more interested in seeing this, even though the Soviet Union was technically a, quote, allied power, the US was more interested in seeing the Soviet Union weakened than seeing the Nazis defeated. And there's a whole history of that we can talk about, including all of the ways that the United States was appeasing Nazi Germany, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt actually sent back a ship with 300 Jewish refugees on it who were then exterminated by Nazi Germany. And that was coincidentally the ship was called the SS St. Louis. They sent them back to be killed. But on the other hand, it was the Soviets, the Red Army, who single-handedly broke the back of Nazi Germany and paid a horrible price in the process. Over 27 million Russian people died during the course of the Second Imperialist World War. And the Battle of Stalingrad alone, over 1 million Russians died. And at Leningrad, which was the name that was given to Petrograd or St. Petersburg, which had actually been the capital of the revolution. The chairman just talked about how the Soviets were key to the Bolshevik Revolution, and the main one was the Petrograd Soviet. That was where the capital was. The Winter Palace and everything was in St. Petersburg, or what came to be known as Leningrad. So Nazi Germany, as a symbolic and literal attack on the Russian Revolution and the history of the Bolshevik Revolution, chose Leningrad as the target of a brutal 900-day long siege and blockade where they starved the people and forced the people to endure freezing cold winters. Millions of people died. The people formed defense units to fortify the city against the Nazi invasion and had to live off of bread that they made from sawdust. And at the end of this 900-day siege, the Russian people were victorious in pushing back the Nazis and ultimately leading to the defeat of Nazi Germany. And again, this is not the history that you get taught in the United States about what happened with the Nazis during the Second Imperialist War. And then just a few years after that, the United States and Europe formed NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, with the explicit purpose of isolating and containing and contending with the Soviet Union. And there's a lot that can be said about this, but just quickly to mention that in the 1970s, the chairman has done much to uncover the truth about this history, that the country of Afghanistan had a progressive government where there was, women had rights and power, and there were democratic rights that the people enjoyed, and they had a progressive society, and they had a relationship with the Soviet Union. And the United States actually went in, the CIA, under President James Earl Carter and his national security advisor, who's pictured there, Zbigniew Brzezinski. They went in and funded and armed and trained people who were referred to as the Mujahideen, and used them to create a proxy war in order to force the Soviet Union into a military engagement with the goal of weakening and ultimately collapsing the economy of the Soviet Union. And the reason we have a picture of a chessboard is because Brzezinski summed up this strategy in a book that he wrote called The Grand Chessboard, using people's lives as chess pieces to achieve their own objectives, which of course they continue to do today. But these things did happen, but to truly understand why ultimately the Soviet Union was defeated, you have to understand African internationalism. And in this groundbreaking book, Izwele to Africa, the political report to the Third Congress of the African People's Socialist Party, the chairman made the incredibly important point that while the political conditions, as the chairman explained, the political conditions existed in Russia for socialists to ascend to power, but the historical basis for socialism as an economic system, as a social system, as a mode of production, did not yet exist. And because of that, although socialists came to power, Russia continued to be surrounded by a global colonial capitalist economy. And as the chairman concludes, to overturn capitalism, to achieve socialism, you have to overturn the colonial mode of production. And only when colonialism is destroyed, when the African working class is liberated and has possession of state power over the means of production, can there be the historical basis for international socialism to flourish. And what we see here, this is going back to what the chairman was just talking to us about earlier, that, so there's 2 points here. One is that the chairman explains that Russia, the historical basis for socialism did not exist in Russia, according to the understandings of African internationalism. The chairman also points out that the historical conditions for socialism did not exist in Russia, even according to Marx, and even according to the Marxist understanding, which, as represented by this stair-step analogy, Marx believed that quote-unquote society developed through various historical stages of social development that rose from, in a vertical fashion, from the lowest to the highest stage, with the lowest stage being so-called primitive communism, which, as the chairman pointed out, is something that did not exist in Europe. So they had to actually go outside of Europe to observe African and indigenous people who had societies that they disparagingly referred to as primitive communism, and that in order to achieve socialism, that quote-unquote society had to go first through capitalism. So there were actually socialists in Russia who were advocating for the development of capitalism as the pathway towards achieving socialism. But the thing the chairman has made it possible for us to understand is that this entire formula for assuming this is how revolution unfolds and this is how social transformation unfolds is based on a massive blind spot in the Marxist worldview of the development of society, and that the Marxists were describing a process that they were observing as taking place within Europe. They were describing stages of development that they assumed would take place in Europe, but they applied it to the whole world. They turned it into universal laws of social development. And they missed the fact that Chairman Omali Yeshitela has shown that society at this point was not something that existed in Europe or in Russia or in some city-state within the European world, but something that existed on a global scale, that there wasn't just an economy in Russia or an economy in Europe or an economy in Africa, that there was one world economy linked together by the colonial mode of production with different components that all had a dialectical relationship to each other. And this is something, a fatal shortcoming in the understanding of Marxism that essentially hindered every struggle for socialism that has taken place up to this point. So on the next slide, we see Lenin, who was genuinely fighting for revolution to happen throughout Europe and throughout the world. He recognized that technically Russia did not go through the stages laid out by Marx, but he was still fighting for the socialists to take power immediately. He was not in favor of waiting for capitalism to fully develop in Russia. He was saying when there's an opportunity to take power, you need to take power. And in order to give some kind of theoretical explanation to the practical potential to take power at the time that he did, he came up with the concept of Russia as the weak link of the imperialist chain. And that if socialists could come to power in Russia, it would spark revolution throughout the rest of the imperialist world and especially throughout Europe, especially in Germany, where there was industrial capitalism and an industrial working class, but also throughout Europe and throughout the world, but primarily in Europe. But as that did not happen, and as anti-colonial struggles continued to rage throughout the world, anti-colonial struggles started to make a profound influence on Lenin's consciousness. And I wanted to, if we go to the next slide, I'm going to read quickly from a quote from the chairman from the 5th Congress of the African People's Socialist Party. The chairman writes, "Because of the structure of a world economy built on the pedestal of the brutal exploitation of Africans and other oppressed nation subjects, the locus of the real class contradiction is not between the workers and bosses within the oppressor nation, but between the oppressor and oppressed nations. On July 19th, 1920, V.I. Lenin, leader of the Russian Revolution of 1917, made a presentation to the Second Congress of the Third Communist International that reflected the impact the Garvey movement and other struggles for national liberation was having on the consciousness of Europeans who had previously disregarded our significance. Faced with the growing clamor and actions of the world's peoples to escape imperialist domination, Lenin was forced to conclude, quote, this is a quote from V.I. Lenin, "World imperialism shall fall when the revolutionary onslaught of the exploited and oppressed workers in each country, overcoming resistance from petty bourgeois elements and the influence of the small upper crust of labor aristocrats, merges with the revolutionary onslaught of hundreds of millions of people who have hitherto stood beyond the pale of history and have been regarded merely as the objects of history." End quote. The chairman continues, "The fact that Lenin was wrong in his estimation of the significance of the workers from the industrialized capitalist countries in the ultimate defeat of imperialism is not as important as the fact that he and others were forced by the growth and power of our movement to acknowledge that our re-entry into history is a precondition for the defeat of imperialism. Thank you, Garvey." Those are the words of Chairman Amalia Shatella. So for the next few slides, we're going to look at some of the specific struggles that Lenin and the Bolsheviks were taking on within the European socialist movement of that time, and more specifically, how these struggles have been taken on and advanced to a higher level by the leadership of Chairman Amalia Shatella. So in winning the need for revolutionary organization, guided by revolutionary theory, with the goal of achieving power for the working class, Lenin went up against a whole array of opportunists who were attempting to take the struggle in some other direction. And that's what we're going to look at now. This is a definition actually provided by the chairman for what opportunism means: sacrificing the long-term interests of the oppressed in pursuit of the short-term advantage for a sector of the population. One such example of opportunism that Lenin was involved in, on the next slide, was the struggle against reformism. And as the chairman has explained, there's a difference between fighting for reform and fighting for reformism. And Lenin addressed this in relationship to socialists at that time, whose position was that the working class should be involved in a struggle for an 8-hour workday. That should be the goal, not involved in a political struggle for power. And on this note, Lenin said, reformism in general means that people confine themselves to agitating for changes which do not require the removal of the main foundations of the old ruling class, changes that are compatible with the preservation of these foundations. The 8-hour day is compatible with the preservation of the power of capital. The Russian liberals, in order to attract the workers, are themselves prepared to endorse this demand, quote, as far as possible. Those demands for which Luke does not want to agitate are incompatible with the preservation of the foundations of the current social system. And I wanted to quote now from Chairman Amalia Shatella in an incredible presentation that he gave actually here in St. Louis on Black community control of the police, where the chairman said, "In the final analysis, we will only be able to fix the relationship existing between Africans and the police and other instruments of US colonial state power through total destruction of the oppressor's state apparatus that contaminates every aspect of Black life from the cradle to the grave. In the final analysis, it will take a revolution to change the relationship we have to the police. There is a correct and an incorrect way to fight for reform. However, even while we are building toward revolution, one way, the method being promoted by the government and its servants, is opportunism. Opportunism is the practice of sacrificing the long-term interests of the oppressed for some short-term advantage for a sector of the population, the middle class or petty bourgeoisie, that will be provided with plush jobs within the state apparatus. It is opportunism that claims the police cultural and sensitivity training, body cameras, more Black policemen, or police review boards are the solution to the public police executions of our people and the willingness of the judicial system to condone them. This is why the demand for Black community control of the police is so important. The demand for Black community control of the police deconstructs the colonial relationship between African people and the white power colonial state, unlike the opportunist demands which ultimately seek to perfect the US colonial state apparatus and tighten its noose even more around the throats of oppressed people. So another form of opportunism which Lenin took on in the process of the Russian Revolution was with what he referred to as trade unionism or economism, which was basically the idea, again, promoted by Russian liberals and some socialists, that the working class should be, the work of the working class, the political work of the working class should be to get better wages, to get better union contracts, and that it should be primarily an economic struggle. It should be a struggle for better economic conditions. The political struggle against the czar should be left to the liberal intelligentsia, the intellectuals, and the bourgeoisie. They should be involved in a struggle against the czar. The workers should just be trying to get better conditions. And on that note, Lenin said, the economists in Russia limit the tasks of the working class to an economic struggle for higher wages and better working conditions, asserting that the political struggle is the business of the liberal bourgeoisie. they deny the leading role of the party of the working class, considering that the party should merely observe the spontaneous process of the movement and register events. In their deference to spontaneity to the working class movement, the economists belittle the significance of revolutionary theory and class consciousness, asserting that socialist ideology could emerge from the spontaneous movement, deny the need for a Marxist party to instill socialist consciousness, and thereby clear the way for bourgeois ideology. And there's many different examples of this, but recently the chairman's been referring to this thing of Walmart socialism, basically because Walmart now has $15 an hour minimum wage. And this is an example of this where Bernie Sanders, who was a great so-called socialist, was fighting for that. He was fighting for essentially trade unionism or economism, although opportunism of Bernie Sanders is way deeper than that. But that's one present day example of that. And then on the next slide, so this is a point that I heard the chairman make recently that I really appreciated. And actually, you were mentioning this earlier, Chairman, about scientific socialism, and that Lenin was involved in a struggle for scientific socialism as opposed to what they refer to as utopian socialism. Utopian socialism basically meaning that it was like, you know, yeah, we want socialism, but the way to get there is just to, you know, basically persuade society to move in that direction, to do it peacefully, legally, in a harmonious way. And, you know, eventually we will be able to achieve socialism, and wouldn't that be nice? And that's the dream we're all working towards, but not in favor of actually doing anything to involve the workers in a struggle to take power, destroy capitalism, and build socialism. And what Lenin said about utopian socialism is the liberal utopia alleges that one could bring about appreciable improvements in Russia, in her political liberty, and in the condition of the mass of her working people peacefully and harmoniously, without hurting anyone's feelings, without a ruthless class struggle fought to the finish. It is a utopia of peace between a free Russia and the Purishkeviches, which that was one of the czarist butchers, Purishkevich, that worked under the czar. So, but the chairman takes this criticism of utopian socialism way further by pointing out that the true utopian socialism is that which is advocated for and upheld by the entire Marxist ideology and white left, which assumes that you can somehow get to socialism without overturning colonialism. What could be a more blatant expression of utopian socialism? Run around talking about socialism, but not have any relationship to the struggle to overturn colonialism, which is the foundation upon which capitalism rests. And on the next slide, we have, this was another really important question, and there's entire studies on this that the chairman has done. And there's a great article actually in the Burning Spear newspaper of a presentation the chairman gave about this book, The State and Revolution by Lenin, that I encourage people to read, where the chairman really brings life to the struggles that were happening at that time, and the fact that Lenin was fighting for an understanding that the goal of the Bolshevik Party and the revolutionary struggle in Russia was for the working class to seize state power and create a dictatorship of the workers, a dictatorship of the proletariat, which meant destroying the state power under the czar and creating the state power in the hands of the workers. And he was advocating for this understanding in contention with anarchists at that time who were against state power in all forms. So they didn't want the czar to have state power. They didn't want the workers to have state power. So they were extremely problematic. But also Lenin was contending with other self-proclaimed revolutionaries who believed that, yeah, the workers need to have state power, but that just happens through a natural evolution, and the state will wither away, and then the workers will have state power, and you don't actually have to like make an armed struggle for state power. So Lenin was involved in these debates and these struggles, which were really critical. And what all of this really comes down to is the importance of revolutionary theory And Lenin has a famous quote, "Without revolutionary theory, there can be no revolutionary movement." And as Chairman Amalia Shatella has further expounded on this, a commitment to revolution, the chairman says, requires a commitment to advanced revolutionary theory. It is worth repeating that there can be no revolution without revolutionary theory. Revolutionary theory is a precondition for the overthrow of spontaneity or the tradition of tailing behind events. And this is sort of coming to the conclusion of this as the practical form that Lenin fought for to spread the theory and to win the Russian masses to the theory that he was advocating at that time. Lenin believed in the creation of an all-Russian newspaper to unite the movement and to unite the people with a clear ideological focus. So he created a newspaper called Iskra, the Spark. And you can see another incendiary newspaper created by the African People's Socialist Party, the Burning Spear, which had the same purpose, but on a much higher level, which now over the next few slides, I'm going to quote from something the chairman wrote about Iskra, the spear, the spark, and its relationship to the Burning Spear. So the chairman wrote, "Almost 100 years ago, V.I. Lenin, the Russian revolutionary who led the first successful Eurasian struggle against capitalism that resulted in socialists assuming power in Russia in 1917, defined the vanguard party necessary for revolution. The success of this organizational template is one of the factors that led to our creation of the African People's Socialist Party. Lenin's party building recipe included the founding of a party newspaper that could be an organizing tool and method of transmitting socialist ideas among the working class. Lenin's approach to the issue of party building was expounded on in the 1938 publication, History of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, Bolshevik, a textbook used to educate party members about the Soviet Union." So now the chairman quotes extensively from that book. And in that book, it says, "Lenin considered that such a newspaper would serve not only to weld the party ideologically, but also to unite the local bodies within the party organizationally. The network of agents and correspondents of the newspaper representing the local organizations would provide a skeleton around which the party can be built up organizationally. For," Lenin said, "a newspaper is not only a collective propagandist and a collective agitator, but also a collective organizer. This network of newspaper agents will form the skeleton of precisely the organization we need, namely one that is sufficiently large to embrace the whole country, sufficiently wide and many-sided to effect a strict and detailed division of labor, sufficiently tried and tempered to be able unswervingly to carry on its work under all circumstances, at all turns, and in all contingencies, sufficiently flexible to be able to avoid open battle against an enemy of overwhelming strength when he has concentrated all his forces at one spot, and yet able to take advantage of the awkwardness of this enemy and to attack him whenever and wherever least expected." Now on the next slide. So it continues. "As to the structure and composition of the party itself, Lenin considered that it should consist of two parts: a close circle of regular cadres of leading party workers, chiefly professional revolutionaries. That is, a party workers free from all occupation except party work, and possessing the necessary minimum of theoretical knowledge, political experience, organizational practice, and the art of combating the czarist police and of eluding them. And B, a broad network of local party organizations and a large number of party members enjoying the sympathy and support of hundreds of thousands of working people. I assert," Lenin wrote, "one, that no revolutionary movement can endure without a stable organization of leaders that maintains continuity. Two, that the wider the masses spontaneously drawn into the struggle, the more urgent the need of such an organization, the more solid this organization must be. Three, that such an organization must consist chiefly of people professionally engaged in revolutionary activity. Four, that in an autocratic state, the more we confine the membership of such organization to people who are professionally engaged in revolutionary activity and who have been professionally trained in the art of combating the political police, the more difficult it will be to wipe out such an organization. Five, the greater will be the number of people of the working class and of the other classes of society who will be able to join the movement and perform active work in it. As to the character of the party that was being built up and its role in relation to the working class, as well as its aims and objects, Lenin held that the party should form the vanguard of the working class, that it should be the guiding force of the working class movement, coordinating and directing the class struggle of the proletariat. The ultimate goal of the party was the overthrow of capitalism and the establishment of socialism. Its immediate aim was the overthrow of czardom and the establishment of a democratic order. And inasmuch as the overthrow of capitalism was impossible without the preliminary overthrow of czardom, the principal task of the party at any given moment was to rouse the working class and the whole people for the struggle against czardom, to develop a revolutionary movement of the people against it, and to overthrow it as the first and serious obstacle in the path of socialism. And then the chairman concludes this section by saying, next slide, with our founding, the chairman wrote, the African People's Socialist Party has improved on the party building process initiated by V.I. Lenin. With the party's newspaper, The Burning Spear, the party has helped to define the struggle against parasitic, that is to say, colonial capitalism. The Burning Spear newspaper was the critical pre-party instrument in forging the ideological and political path to organizing the party on revolutionary principles. And while Lenin identified the immediate task to advance to socialism in Russia as the defeat of czardom, we have long understood that the true road to socialism is painted black, and that the immediate task in the fight for socialism globally is the defeat of colonialism, the undemocratic pedestal upon which capitalism rests. Nevertheless, the chairman says, we see the value of Lenin's insights and how in many ways they reflect the process of party building that our party has followed and the tactics and strategy our party provided for the entire African national liberation struggle on the road to socialism. Next slide. So the point that the chairman made there about the fact that the party identified that the immediate task in the struggle for socialism is the overthrow of colonialism is one which only the African People's Socialist Party was able to clarify and bring to the worldwide struggle against capitalism. And it was something which, as the chairman talked about earlier and read from the book on the communist internationals, was always a raging debate within the European socialist movement. There were struggles on the question of colonialism. On the next slide, the chairman already summed this up. The 1907 Stuttgart Congress of the Second Communist International, the commission that was formed to debate the question of colonialism, their majority resolution was in favor of socialist colonialism. They believed that colonialism was something that was advantageous to the European socialist movement. And the way the chairman summed it up in Iswele Africa is he said, today, white left nationalist opportunism has been forced to acquire a sophisticated articulation of its unity with maintaining the oppression of Africans. There was a time when it made no attempt to hide its colonialist worldview. And that was something that was very clear there. Lenin was opposed to that position, and later at a subsequent Congress put forward a resolution on colonialism, which he adopted alongside a resolution presented by M.N. Roy, who was an Indian anti-colonial leader at that time. However, the question of colonialism and the Soviet Union's relationship to it was never really resolved. It was always something that was fraught with contradictions. And the chairman has written about how, on the next slide, the Soviet Union throughout its history supported African anti-colonial struggles, but they did so on their own terms and to forward their own foreign policy and other material objectives. And the chairman says, during the height of the anti-colonial struggles in Africa in the 1960s, the Soviet Union chose what it determined to be the, quote, authentic six anti-colonial organizations. These were organizations the Soviet Union provided with ideological, political, military, and other kinds of training and material resources. And that included the MPLA in Angola, the PAIGC in Guinea, the ANC in Azania, SWAPO in Southwest Africa, ZAPU in Zimbabwe, and Frelimo in Mozambique. And on the next slide, the left this left other anti-colonial organizations to have to contend not only with direct imperialist white power, but also with the authentic six, whose strength was often determined by support from the Soviet Union, which was motivated by its own material and policy interests. And as you heard with the African National Congress and other of those organizations that did ultimately come to power, that were led by the African petty bourgeoisie and basically implemented neo-colonialism in the parts of Africa where they came to power. But the chairman has explained that Russia was involved in these relationships with African organizations to facilitate their interests and their objectives. China had relationships with African organizations, which was done also to facilitate their own interests. But now African people, through the African Socialist International, through the African People's Socialist Party, are advancing their own interests. And the slogan, "We are our own liberators," African people are their own liberators, is one which has been given life by the African People's Socialist Party and the question of agency of the African working class. And that brings me to the final slide here, which is that the chairman has written that the African Socialist International is the basis for a genuine communist international. And I want to end with this quote from the chairman, that the African Socialist International arms the international African working class with the revolutionary science and organization to fight successfully for liberation everywhere African people are located. Through the ASI, they are organizing the advanced detachment of the African Revolution throughout the world, providing the organizational, ideological, and political training required to win. Africans themselves determine the legitimacy of revolutionary anti-colonial movements and organizations based on their self-defined interests. And I'll close by saying to white people who consider ourselves socialists, communists, anti-capitalists, that, as the chairman said, the task of every genuine white communist is to work under the leadership of the African working class, the true working class of the world, to fight for the defeat of white power and the victory of black power. And concretely, this means joining the African People's Solidarity Committee, working under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party, fighting for reparations to African people, building white solidarity with black power, because the road to socialism is painted black. Uhuru.
Woo! Okay.
Major comment here.
Yes. Oh.
There's a way that this question of Russia and China, and especially of Russia, and even of Jesse Neville leading this discussion today, that presupposes the Russians were motivated, or had a sense of let's go out and be opportunists and let's be racist or something to that effect. But the problem was it was built into their worldview, the whole philosophy that saw themselves, as I say, Europeans, seeing themselves as the center of the universe. And therefore, the ultimate solution would be all-inclusive. If they solve the problem, it's like in this country, the United States, there used to be this saying from General Motors that, what was it, what's good for General Motors is good for America. There's like, what's good for Europe, what's good for white people is good for the rest of the world. I mean, this was built in to the whole, how they perceived the world. The worldview was distorted. Because as we mentioned, even going back to looking at Marx, talking about primitive accumulation of capital and how capitalism gets started, we are relegated, let's say, the whole world. Got to remember, white people constitute a minority of the world population. But here we see their aspirations, their requirements for development being primary, and somehow the rest of us play some auxiliary role in that process. So I'm not saying that they say, hey, let's make the black people an auxiliary role, although I think 1907 was a clear example of that. That was an attempt in 1907, Stuttgart, when they said, let's have some socialist colonialism. But I'm talking about the theoretical problem that they were trapped with this whole assumption that what is good for Europe, what's good for the white man is good for the world. And so when we see, and then because the world revolution that Marx talked about didn't happen. The world revolution that Lenin was talking about didn't happen. And you got to remember, Lenin died in 1924. So he's dead now. When we get involved in this whole question of authentic six and all that, we saw Lenin trying to move. We talked about what he said in 1920, which was the same year of this incredible convention that was held by Negro peoples of the world in New York by Marcus Garvey. But Lenin is dead now. And the worldview is just all distorted because we are not subjects of history. We're simply objects of history. I think Lenin said something about that in this statement in 1920 that I was just referencing. So this was an extreme limitation, but they got this problem. Now, first of all, they said this is what they were. The Russian Revolution represented this. People have forgotten. Lenin said that at some juncture, this is state capitalism. The new economic policy that Lenin came up with, it was because the European Revolution didn't happen. The World Revolution didn't happen. And it didn't happen because the whole thing rests upon the foundation of colonialism. So they're not going to make it happen unless they do what they talked about in Stuttgart and have a socialist colonialism. There's no way forward other than that. This has been a profound, ongoing contradiction in the so-called communist or socialist movement. I didn't create that. Black nationalists didn't create it even. This is just a contradiction that's inherent in the worldview that they were working from. So when we look at the authentic six, what the Russians are now trying to do is salvage this revolution, because they're surrounded by all the other imperial powers, who are determined to bring them down. They've done everything they could to bring them down. They changed the character of the thing. Initially the Russian Revolution, they had said they were going to get rid of all the managers in the factories and what have you, all of the bosses. Going to eliminate all of that. They're going to eliminate ranks in the military force. Not going to have any ranks. Everybody's going to be equal and what have you. But while they're trying to do that, they're making this war, and the Tsar's army was the only one with any experience, and they're being aggressed by all of the other imperialist forces. They're being attacked. They've got to have some kind of economic life for the people who now have have some kind of control of their agricultural capacity in terms of it's no longer under feudalism, etc. But they don't have the expertise within the working class itself. So they got to borrow from where? They borrow from the petty bourgeoisie, from the ones who serve the bourgeoisie. So they got to solve this problem, and then they got to still call it communism or socialism. They got to still call it that. Because otherwise, to say that Marxism failed, to say that this isn't real in the same way. And so this is Comrade Redbeard asked, should we characterize this authentic six as a form of opportunism? Yes, it was opportunism. But this is also should help us to understand that, generally speaking, the definition of opportunism doesn't require intent. Opportunism, like it was said before, the road to hell is the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And so what now is happening is the Soviet Union attempting to maintain itself, this first, and all of the people who call themselves part of this Communist International have a responsibility to protect what was to be the world revolution that was headquartered in Russia of the Soviet Union. So I just wanted to make that intervention. I think it's extremely important to understand, some of these things. And I know we'll be talking more about that as we move forward. I mentioned the Jesse Neville presence here is because I saw some comment about this is a trap, that the party is leading people into a trap, precisely because I guess the white guy who was sitting up here leading this discussion or something that represented a trap that Black people are being led into, etc. Now we're trying to lead you out of a trap, out of a quagmire of imperial domination, and in some instances, just because, I love Africa, and we say that all of us are Africans in the whole African world. And And from our perspective, that's just the reality that African people throughout the world constitute a single nation. But to say that is not the same thing as say that all Africans are smart and all Africans have the right position in terms of the development of classes and society and things like that. We exist in a world, and the world is not simply an African world. I talked about the emergence of a global social system, a global economy, and we are part of it. And what has happened is that there's all kinds of limitations being placed on our perception of who we are and what the world is. And somehow we don't see the dialectical relationship that we have to the rest of the world. And the fact is that the problems of the world will be resolved as a consequence of defeating the colonial mode of production. And the colonial mode of production locks us all into a single social system that is parasitic. It's dialectically parasitic. And so I just wanted to say those things before turning it back over to you, Comrade Yejide. Uhuru.
Uhuru, comrades. I just, yes, the applause is definitely justified. And, I hope that everybody is writing and taking down notes, because this is what the Omali Taught Me study is all about, is to take down notes and to record it, research it, to be dialecticians, which is what the party and the chairman calls on us to do. So I really want to appreciate the Chair Jesse Neville and Chairman for all of what you've given to us, and just really helping African people understand the internationalism that we have to take on. Like, I really appreciate what you just said, Chairman, in terms of like really confining Africans just to this African-centered thing, when we exist in a world where things are happening and things influence, the outcomes of African people, but African people also can influence the outcome of what's happening in the world as well. So we have to know what's going on, and we have to be able to sum things up and provide and come up with an analysis around these things. So I really appreciate this presentation around African internationalism and the helping us understand, the Russian Revolution. So at this point, I want to, Uhuru, Chairman, you're on mute. I can't hear the chairman, so I don't know if he's.
This national narcissism that they're locked into, that prevents them from seeing the rest of the world. They are the world. And the biggest problem that we've got. So when we talk about Africans having to understand that we are looking at a history of what we have done is move us from this perspective that sees the world as simply revolving around Europe and the rest of us as simply auxiliaries. We have connected the world so that there's one world, and white people got to get used to that stuff. That the assumption somehow is that people make history for white people. And that African, this is what the whole robbing of agency from Africans and other peoples around the world. We just play in history a role of providing or not for the well-being of Europe, of white people, et cetera. And that's natural and normal. And anytime we violate that, then we come under fierce criticism, whether it's 5 o'clock in the morning with FBI agents attacking our homes and destroying our properties and things like that, or just from white left. Severe criticism, and I just think that the world has to be understood, and that when we say that we are dialectical or historical materialists, it doesn't mean that we agree with everything that Marx has said. Marx perfected this. In fact, it's using this method of investigation, scientific method of investigation and analysis, that helps us to understand that we are not Marxists, and that Marxist was wrong on some of the critical questions. But we don't say Marx was wrong in the same way we've heard some forces say to attack and the whole question of socialism, communism, destruction of a system rooted in exploitation. And this is why you hear even black nationalists who are, that's the white man's this and the white man's that. I mean, think about it, comrades. I mean, when has the white man come up with a good idea? I mean, just think about it. I mean, this is just the most ridiculous stuff that you can come up with. You know, I mean, the whole, I mean, it's why do you think they rob libraries in Egypt and other places, then steal them and destroy everything else? Why do you think Napoleon sent all those people into Egypt to steal the science and the history, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And then you get it, and then you say that the white man came up with that. No, white man came up with you. White man invented Negroes. Before Negroes, we were pretty smart, you know. So anyway, Comrade Yesterday, President Yesterday, I know I've been disruptive again, but I just feel like it's really important that we're not religious in that way. You know, like this whole thing, you can't say, well, Marx said it, damn it. I believe it, and that's it. I've seen religious thing, yes, bumper stickers. God said it, I believe it, that's it. You know, what's the basis of why you think about something? You already got it. God said it, you know, and he said it. You know, he didn't even use, you know, Moses to come up with the mountain to give these whatever laws to people. And in fact, Moses parachuted from a sea, some kind of airplane, and brought it down. Long time ago. Comrades.
Chairman.
Yeah. I don't mean to mess with Moses, but you know, the point is that even when you look at stuff like that, it would have been more believable if he had parachuted down, you know. Yeah.
Uhuru, once again, I want to appreciate the chairman for his intervention and for the presentation that preceded us with Jesse Neville. At this time, for the sake of time, we do have to get into the announcements and questions and answers, because there's a lot of questions that I think the chairman would like to dig into, and some questions that the chairman has already addressed. But first, we want to look at where people are watching us from. So we have people watching and participating from Oakland, California, Lakeland, Florida, San Diego, California, Lexington, Kentucky, Battle Creek, Michigan, St. Louis, Missouri, South Africa, Kokosi, Flossmoor, Illinois, Marion County, Georgia, Gainesville, Florida, Collegeville, PA, Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, San Francisco, California, Las Vegas, Nevada, Cape Town, South Africa, Bermuda, Caribbean, Sweden, Stockholm, Sweden, Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm seeing more come in, Orlando, Florida, and I'm sure there's other people that are watching that haven't put up their time, but we're gonna get you. Before we go into the announcement, though, I do want to pick up and ask Comrade Akenge to come up from the office of the chairman and to tell us about the exciting Northeast U.S. tour with the chairman this fall, and how everyone on here can support bringing him there.
Uhuru, comrades, thank you. What a great study today. Fantastic. And I just want to appreciate everyone for tuning in today, and for everyone that has given thus far. Today, I want to start by saying that thanks to everyone that has contributed to Uhuru Tours. We have raised $995, which does not include your donations that you have done today, and that's in about a 4-week time period. And just to say that the Burning Spear Publications team is happy to announce the chairman's new book, which is The Verdict is In, Reparations Now, and it has already gone to the printers. This is a powerful book which will include most of the brilliant testimonies from the first tribunal on reparations to African people, held in Brooklyn, New York in 1982. Led by the African People's Socialist Party and Chairman Omali Yeshitela as the people's advocate, the tribunal put the U.S. government on trial for genocide of African people and ruled that African people were owed $4.1 trillion in reparations to the U.S. alone. The chairman used the Genocide Convention of the United Nations as the legal basis for the tribunal and exposed again in 1982 that the colonial conditions of African people met every one of the UN's 5 qualifications for the crime of genocide. It was during that time that the chairman determined that the party would make reparations a household word, which indeed it has become. Uhuru. Uhuru Tours is getting ready to launch a tour for this very important book, which will go to Philadelphia, Newark, and New York in September. And we're using Each Omali Taught Me to help us raise resources for the tour. We are asking everyone who can to go to www.uhurutours.com/donate and make a donation. Our goal today is to raise $200, and we're going to do this each week until the middle of September. So today I want to thank Penny, Lisa, Ya, and Sarah who have donated thus far. We have $120 left to go today to reach our goal. So please go to www.uhurutours.com/donate and make your donation today. Uhuru, thank you.
Uhuru.
Uhuru, thank you so much, Okenge. Oh, I hear a little echo. Okay. Okay, next we're going to go into our announcements, and then we're going to give an opportunity for people's questions to be answered by the chairman. I do believe that there are slides. Great. So join the counteroffensive to stop the FBI attacks on the African People's Socialist Party and the African liberation struggle. Drop the charges against the Uhuru 3. Donate or volunteer to the Hands Off Uhuru, Hands Off Africa Defense Campaign today. For more information, go to handsoffuhuru.org to volunteer, donate, sign the petition, and sign the emergency response pledge. Okay. So every Thursday at 1 p.m., 8 p.m. Central Time, African Time, tune in live for the Hands Off Uhuru, Hands Off Africa, Africa Regional broadcast. Watch and follow on Facebook at facebook.com/APSP Africa Region African Region, no.com. Slide 3. So on Friday, July 21st at 6:30 p.m. Central, the Hands Off Uhuru Fundraising Committee will host a virtual film showing of the documentary American Justice on Trial, portraying the trial of Black Panther leader Huey P. Newton in 1969, the historic struggle that inspired the slogan, "Free Huey or the sky's the limit." The screening will also feature clips from Charles Gary, Street Fighter in the Courtroom, about the attorney who represented Huey and other Black Panthers and how his legal tactics were informed by the political leadership of the anti-colonial movement of African people for liberation. The film screening will be followed by a panel discussion with speakers including African People's Socialist Party Chairman Omali Yeshitela and Penny Hess, Chair of the African People Solidarity Committee. Buy your tickets at tinyurl.com/Uhuru Film to attend online, or if you're in St. Louis, you can attend in person at Aquaba Hall at 4101 West Florissant Avenue. The Midwest region comes to St. Louis owns One Africa, One Nation's Farmers Market, a program of the Black Power blueprint to end food apartheid and build economic development in North St. Louis. The market runs from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. in our new, beautiful location, the historic O'Fallon Park, on the first Saturday of every month. The remaining market dates are August 5th, September 2nd, and then a special Halloween festival on October 28th. For more info, visit oneafricamarket.com. As you've already heard from Comrade Okenge, announcing the new book, The Verdict is In, Reparations Now. It is the 40th anniversary edition of the report from the 1982 World Tribunal on Reparations to African People and includes a foreword by Loezi Kinshasa, additional testimonies, and an epilogue by Chairman Omali Yeshitela. You can pre-order now at the Burning Spear store to have your copy signed by the chairman. And this book is with the printer right now, and pre-orders are expected to ship out in early August. Make sure you like and subscribe to Burning Spear TV on YouTube to catch every episode of the Omali Taught Me Sunday Study. Uhuru Tours and the Speakers Bureau is an institution of the African People's Socialist Party that coordinates events and tours for Chairman Omali Yeshitela and other party speakers and leaders. Book Chairman Omali and other Uhuru Movement speakers for your campus or organization now. You can email info@uhurutours.com or call 727-914-3621. And for more for more events, go to theburningspear.com/events. And finally, we would like for you to join the party if you're an African person. This is the political revolutionary theory of the African working class. And if you're watching this and you're not a member of the party as of yet, or any member of the mass organizations, you need to get on board. So that concludes all of our announcements. It's my honor to now go into Q&A and take a look at what people are asking the chairman and give the chairman an opportunity to respond to the questions. So I'm going to start with Black.
May I ask a question? I don't know if I may have missed it, but did the announcement include the upcoming Black is Back national conference that's going to be happening in St. Louis? And that upcoming national conference will be here in St. Louis on, I think the date is what, August 9th? August 19th and 20th. So it's going to be here in St. Louis, and you can go to blackisbackcoalition.org, blackisbackcoalition.org to get more information. But that's going to be here in St. Louis. And so I know you need time to be able to get cheap tickets if you're going to be flying in from someplace else. And that's going to happen also within the same time frame that there will be an inauguration of housing fourplex for African workforce plan program that's been initiated by Black Power Blueprint here in St. Louis that will provide housing for Africans who coming out of the prison, men and women, and who will be participating in a workforce program where Africans will be learning culinary arts at Uhuru Bakery and Cafe, and also how to establish and run their own businesses. So please be aware of that, and everybody needs to come to St. Louis anyway, especially people who've never been here, to see the programs that we've created and understand better why it is that the government would be attacking us precisely because we are waging this successful war to negate the colonial stranglehold on our people here and worldwide. So we can come at President to the questions and discussion. Uhuru.
Chairman. So the first question that I'm going to read, and this may have already been touched upon, but maybe deepen it a little bit more. It was from Black No Cop Zone on YouTube. Uhuru, who was fighting against who in the First Imperialist World War? Was Russia allied with any particular European imperialist forces? If so, who, and against who did they stand?
Well, the war, the First Imperialist World War, Russia was aligned in that war with the so-called, was it the Allies or Axis then? They were fighting against Germany. And there were various powers, England, the US and France, all of them were in this struggle with Germany. So Russia, the Russian government as it existed then was allied with them. And Lenin was able to come back to Russia with the assistance of the Germans, because the Germans knew that the position of Lenin and the Bolsheviks was to take Russia out of that war. And the Germans wanted Russia out of that war so that they would not have to be concerned with fighting on that front. And so they facilitated Lenin getting back into to Russia for that purpose. So I hope that was sufficient. Who was that from?
That was from Black No Cop Zone.
Okay.
Diop on YouTube.
Uhuru.
Uhuru. I'm going to ask you this question, Chairman, but I think you already addressed it in a certain kind of way, the question of Marxism. But from Mike Williams on Facebook, says, we are Africans, I'm paraphrasing, not the first communists. How does Marxism relate in a positive way to African freedom all over the world? And how does Marxism achieve this?
I can't answer the question for Marxism. I don't think Marxism does. It's not this. It's not because we don't appreciate the contributions that Marx made. I think this whole issue of science in terms of the method of investigating and analyzing society, that's referred to as dialectical and/or historical materialism. I think that was extremely important. Although we don't come to the same conclusions that Marx has come to using the methods that he utilized. And so some people have been confused when we say that we're historical materialists, which presupposes that we've come to the same conclusion, have the same basis in our understanding that Marx did. We don't. But we think the science was really important in terms of investigating. It took us from a place of having to rely on speeches made by great leaders and superstitions and all this other kind of stuff to understand how progress is made in history. And we are not Marxists, and we do think Marx, played a really important role in that fashion. But I've tried to make the point during this process that there was a horrible blind spot there. And that Marx and Marxists was among a number of European expressions or worldviews that sought to explain the world subsequent to the collapse of feudalism in Europe. And because we recognize that when you look at like the economic basis of society, which is that process through that human beings are locked into, independent of your will, our will, the production and reproduction of life. We look at the independent basis of society. We recognize that associated with that, locked in with that, is the ideas stemming from that, flowing from that in society. And the society has to have an explanation for its being. And feudalism worked for a long time, but it was again explaining Europe and the process, what was anticipated about the development of Europe and Europeans and Africans were and other peoples were defined more or less as auxiliary to that. The Europe was the subject, and the rest of us were objects of European history. So, and that's Marx's history, as well. And there was a serious blind spot. That's what we're saying. And that's what African internationalism takes on. That they missed that there was not simply some leap from European feudalism to world capitalism. It was not this magic thing. It was Marx touched on it when he talked about a primitive accumulation of capital. He said that this primitive accumulation of capital played in political economy a role equivalent to original sin in theology. This is the beginning. And this beginning he talked about was turning Africa into a warren for the commercial hunting of black skins, the attack and subjugation of people in India, the interring of the indigenous people in the Americas into mines that were bringing up gold and silver that went to what was becoming Europe. This is the process that Marx talked about, but again, it left no agency to Africans or Mexicans or the other peoples of the world. It was just agency was something that was being exercised by Europe. And we were just auxiliary forces in that process accordingly. And that's the weakness of Marx. And so now what we're hearing is African internationalism say we have a point of view too. And despite the fact that that we've been lynched and killed and murdered for expressing our point of view, and that's by the traditional colonizers, and even untraditional colonizers have punished us when we have moved from the definition of reality that has been imposed on us by Marx and leftists and things like that, who have their own basis for making struggle within their European communities. So, Mike, I hope that was helpful.
Uhuru, Chairman, thank you so much. And this is our last question before we start wrapping up and give you an opportunity to.
Here's a question in this room, comrade.
Oh,
Yesterday.
okay.
Yeah. Oh, I guess you have to come up here and get this 4 feet. We didn't set up properly for you. We didn't know you was coming. We had to bake the cake.
Well, this will be our last question then, and then we can start to begin to wrap up.
Uhuru, comrades. Chairman, I just want to comment on how you translate history by the so-called scholars back then, that they were talking about us without actually talking about us. Mm-hmm. How you translate it and bring that to Africans International and explain the world to us, because it was all about us. And I want to appreciate that. And thank you for being Chairman Omali Yeshitela.
Thank you, 4 feet. Thank you so much. And, you know, I mean, honest forces who are trying to deal with solving the problems in the world, getting rid of oppression and exploitation. I mean, you know, when I talk to white leftists, Marxists, and anti-imperialists, et cetera, in this country, they know something about the history of this country. They know that there's places called Indian reservations. They know that half of Mexico was stolen. They know that even this place where we are located, that's called St. Louis, became a part of American territory, if you will, because of the Great Haitian Revolution forced Thomas Jefferson, this exalted leader of America, the pedophile, the slave owner. They know the condition of Black people in this country, and the fact is that all they got to do is cross the freeway or take the wrong exit and end up in the African community. And what it does in terms of a sphincter clenching moment, you know, gut-wrenching moment. They know this stuff. And so this is something that's in many instances we talk about opportunism that is a conscious kind of amnesia that we're looking at. So, but we are going to be heard, and we are going to make this struggle. And I'm sorry, Comrade President Yejide, for taking so much time, and even the fact that we had an extraordinary conference on yesterday that brought together so many different organizations and groups and people into this broad anti-colonial free speech movement that we have initiated through the Hands Off Uhuru campaign. And we are rectifying practically a lot of these contradictions that have been outstanding, and we're able to do that utilizing the theory of African internationalism. So, Comrade Yejide, Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman, I'm being prompted to give you another question, even though I know it's dangerous to do so. So we're going to let this last question slip in and try to wrap up on time. We have a question from Sean Conscious Image on Facebook. It says, Chairman, can you use defense against the U.S. government that they are suppressing another political party? And is that illegal in the international community?
Yeah, I mean, the fact of the matter is that law being the opinion of the ruling class is not just something that happens, you know, on a national level. The bourgeois, the global bourgeoisie for the longest period of time has been able to say what law is. If you look at international law, most international law was created while Africans lived under colonial domination, and we weren't there. And the changes that we've seen have come since the 1960s with the struggles of independence, et cetera, and then many so-called colonial, people from colonized countries coming into the United Nations. So we've seen some changes with international law. So yeah, I mean, there's international law that could be utilized that would say what the United States is doing in terms of crushing us, attacking us, et cetera, is illegal. The United Nations is the organization that put forth the UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, for example. That was done in 1948. And then the United States took 40 years for the United States to even ratify that. That was international law. It was 40 years after that the United States ratified that. And in during the same time, it was locking up Black people or challenging Black people or doing horrible things to African people because we were charged in the United States with genocide. That's what we were just attacked for. And it says that when it ratified it later on, what was it, 89? What was it? A long time afterwards, when they ratified it, they did it with the caveat that they would have to agree. That is to say, the United States would have to agree to be taken before any kind of world court for the charge of genocide. So it exempts itself from the laws that prevail in the rest of the world. And the way, of course, that the people will guarantee that we have rights, and that's a legal term, by the way we guarantee that we have rights is that when we have custody of the state that makes the laws, when we make lawmakers ourselves, or when we have enough influence that a compromise of such significance can be delivered for violation of our rights, or that the powers, the colonial powers, will have to rectify their behavior in some way or another. And we've seen that kind of thing happen. But it doesn't last. It's long, and it's a feature of dual power when you see them having to finally say at one point that Black people have rights, and even the rights that the African petty bourgeoisie wanted. I forgot now how they characterized it. So that we can go to school and we can get these advantages, et cetera. Then they take it back. As soon as you don't have the power to deliver a consequence, they take it back. Or sometimes when they're in a contest with each other, and there's an assumption that your position, your existence supports one sector of the bourgeoisie as opposed to another sector of the bourgeoisie. Take it back. That's why you got people like governors in Florida and presidents in the United States who all of these rights that you thought you had yesterday, they take them back every day. And Black people too often will go along with it because even as badly, how's it characterized? The lesser of two evils? And the fact is, you're talking about evils, and we call it the evil of two lessers, Anyway, that's the kind of contradictions that we are stuck with. So, Sean, conscious image, yeah, the law is there, and the positive thing, a good thing about the law is that it's something that we can bring up and we can utilize that exposes the contradictions in the society, exposes the hypocrisy of the social system itself, and mobilize African people to be able to deliver consequences, in some instances, be able to push the colonial state into making concessions to the rights of the people. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman, thank you so much. And
I need to say something about the passing of Mutulu Shakur. And we talk about laws and how this brother, serving the community with acupuncture for the dealing with the drug habits that the United States imposed on the African community. And they kept him locked up in prison. He was a proud soldier of the Black Liberation Army that came into existence to liberate African people. And they kept him in prison and said that the condition for him being released from prison was that they had to know he was dying. This is America. Uhuru. Long live Mutulu Shakur. Uhuru.
Uhuru, long live, long live. So before, Chairman, you make your final remarks, I do want to say that we were able to raise $260 in today's program.
Uhuru.
And in addition to who was identified earlier as making donations, we have additional donations from Nyendu, Brooke, Brendan, Maureen, Stephen, and Leah. And I'm sure there's some more that came in after this list was compiled. We appreciate everybody for making those donations. And Chairman, before we close out, and we only have a minute left, if you can give us a closing remark, and then we can wrap up.
I want to thank everybody for being involved in this study. I think we're at a critical point in history now where the ideas that we have been promoting for 50 years or so are now people are capable of hearing them, because it's a whole new era. And the whole world is tied up into a crisis of a profound significance. The world is changing, and we are part of making that change. And the people are powerful, especially when the people come into possession of their own consciousness and their own interests. So thank you, everybody. Join the African People's Socialist Party if you can. If you can't support the African People's Socialist Party, if you can't support the African People's Socialist Party publicly, then support the African People's Socialist Party surreptitiously, but support the party, build the party, and join the organizations of the African People's Socialist Party, like the one that Comrade President Yejide presides over, the African National Women's Organization, like the International People's Uhuru Movement, like the APDEP, All African People's Economic and Development Project, and like the African People's Solidarity Committee and the Uhuru Solidarity Movement that Jesse chairs, Jesse Neville, who was sitting here for me, by the way. So I want to thank you, everybody, for being here, and thank you, Comrade Yejide, for being such a patient force dealing with my indiscipline. And I'm stopping now because I think I'm about 30 seconds or more over time. Uhuru.
Thank you so much, Chairman. And I salute this incredible discussion we've been able to have, and I want to thank the chairman, the Omali Taught Me show team for helping with this production, the promotions, curriculum development, AV, and chat moderation. I also want to thank all of you for tuning in to today's study, whether you're watching on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, or Twitch. We're glad to have you with us. I want to, of course, salute the brilliant leadership of our chairman, Omali Yeshitela. Make sure you follow the chairman on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Twitch, and IG, and subscribe to the Burning Spear TV on YouTube to catch every episode of Omali Taught Me Sunday Study. Uhuru, comrades.
Uhuru.
Uhuru.